Why are y'all out here talking like this new Spiritbox album was a drop off? Because this shit's better than Eternal Blue. I'll come out here and say it. This is a more cohesive, dynamic, and consistently surprising record than Eternal Blue. I didn't hear this for a couple of days. In part because I haven't really been listening to a lot of metalcore recently. I'm really in my hip hop bag right now. And just kind of going off the consensus of what I was seeing about it. And I really like Spiritbox, but Spiritbox have one record. Take Me Out to Dinner More, which they just did and brought me a magnificent meal. So thank you, Spiritbox. So in case you don't know, Spiritbox are a gent progressive metalcore kind of band who emerged onto the scene in about 2017 with an EP that was self-titled, that was very Tesseractian. If that's a term. And that was a very refreshing release because Tesseract were making very, very, very boring music at that moment. Their first EP, as well as their singles collection afterwards of just some loose songs that they were releasing around, right off the bat gave them a lot of hype before they even put out a record. And then the singles from their first album, Eternal Blue, took a long time to come out over the course of the pandemic before the record dropped. So they became baked into and ubiquitous in the culture of the genre before Eternal Blue's release day. And so Eternal Blue, when it comes out, is already just welcomed with open arms and hugged. And part of why I think this is as well is because Eternal Blue is an album that's constructed in a way where every song sounds like it could have been a single, which I think is both its greatest strength and greatest weakness, because obviously that's why Spiritbox are as big of a band as they are. And, the songwriting is really, really good on this thing. Great melodies, great performances, a lot of variety for a debut album. But there's definitely a ceiling to what that album is trying to do. They blew that ceiling off with this record because this record spanned everything that they've ever done. Eternal Blue, the EPs beforehand, the EPs afterwards, throws in some things that they've never done before, like drum and bass influence and hyperpop influence, and goes both heavier and more melodic than anything they'd ever done before. So this is a slam dunk. This is exactly what you would want a band like this to do. And they're doing it pretty tastefully as well. Keep Sweet, which I think is probably the greatest merging of everything that I was talking about, since the riffs in this song are so gloriously chuggy and probably heavier than any other kind of poppier type of track that they were doing beforehand on Eternal Blue, but the chorus is absolute sugar. And then there are these little drum and bass flourishes and little break beats that happen pretty tastefully in this song that I really appreciate because these bands aren't really doing these kinds of things, and B, along that note, Dan Bronstein as a producer isn't usually bringing that kind of influence to this sound. When he's bringing electronic influence, it doesn't sound like this. It kind of sounds like Northlane, and we need bands like this to stop sounding like Northlane. I'm sorry. And so that song coming earlier in the track list as well, I think is also very smart because it that and Black Rainbow, which is a fantastic heavier track that has some moments of vocal modulation in it. I think that those kind of help lightly tease some of the elements that the album goes further into when it gets into the deep end, particularly on Crystal Roses, which is going to be Spiritbox, really Gent's equivalent to Deftones' Pink Cell Phone, and the fact that it's already proven to be one of the most polarizing songs I've ever even heard of. And how you react to it, I think, says more about your music taste than it does about the song itself. I think the song is sick. This song is sick. Y'all just ain't brat. A Haven with Two Faces is probably the best example of influence from the first EP finally being threaded back in, except with the more teeth that are present on this record, I think they're able to take that sound even further, and this might be the best song that they've ever made. Like, that rhythmic shift up that happens, that is what this type of music just, like, at its best thrives off of. That is such a glorious song. It's one of my favorites in the style since the Last Era record. But it's surrounded by a lot of other great stuff that really benefits it as well, with one of the heaviest songs coming right after it, and one of the most melodic songs coming right before it in the title track, which is, I think, almost like sonically a blending of Eternal Blue's title track and Circle With Me, but with the best elements of them fused together. That is also one of the best songs they've ever made. Like, and then the opening track, that song is so sick. That is my favorite opener that they have ever done. Like, Sunkiller, that song is great. That's one of my highlights on Eternal Blue. I think that they're an interesting kind of comparison between these two songs, because I think Sunkiller is probably a more effective opener, but it's so disproportionately better than a lot of the rest of the record for me that I kind of am dissatisfied by it in a way, even though it is a perfectly paced song, and then it drops its breakdown in at the end like a trick drop at the end of a roller coaster. It's so sick. But Fata Morgana is just kind of like crushingly heavy the whole time, with some sick harmonics thrown in there, and an absolutely gorgeous ethereal chorus that floats over. But it's a song where the screams are the focal point, and it's just light seasoning with the cleans, which is the opposite of how Sunkiller did it. And it's exactly what this album needed. It's exactly what this album needed to kind of set the stage for a darker, more experimental, more broody, kind of more crushing experience. This song is very crushing. If I have any downsides with this record, one tiny thing that I only noticed when I went from listening to the New Era record to listening to this is that the production feels a little crushed by Dan's standards. Like, this isn't anything like Super Bloom, which, like, he didn't even mix. I think he had his assistant mix that record, and it's very, like, YouTube rip, no matter what version of it you listen to it sounding. This is definitely better than that, but it doesn't have, like, the expanded, free, kind of, like, airiness of the Last Era record that I actually think this could have benefited from a little bit. But that's a very, very, very small thing. The things that are less small is, like, the existence of Ride the Wave, which is not a terrible song. I think there's probably another draft of that song that's pretty good. But I think the instrumental is really stilted feeling, and it clashes with the melody really badly. Like, the melody itself is fine. That's what I mean by there's a version of this song that exists that's good, and it's one that's just the melody with a different instrumental that actually matches it. But that's not a bad song, that's just kind of a song that needed a little bit of workshopping. The only other one that I'm not super hot on, although I think it's much better than Ride the Wave, is Perfect Soul. But Perfect Soul is different because I kind of just own this as being more about my taste, because, like, it's a very, very, very on paper compositionally sound song. It just sounds exactly like Blessed Be. And it's probably better than Blessed Be. I just don't like being fed the same thing that I've already been fed by an artist, you know? But it was a single, and so, like, I get it, you know? You gotta thread in the fans with things that they know. And, like, I've seen a lot of people who think that this record is not great, and to think that that's, like, the only thing that it has going for it. So, like, fair play, guys. The closer is very different from Constance because it's not nearly as cinematic and grandiose, but I also kind of think it's a better song. Like, the riffs are better, the melodies are better, in my opinion. The textures that are going on are very reminiscent of, like, Dan's work on Volumes Via, which I still think is Dan's best record that he's ever contributed to. Maybe not necessarily from a production standpoint, but at least from, like, a composition perspective. And it's a really great send-off to this project. And it's also, like, a much brighter sounding song than most of the rest of the stuff that this record has going on, which I think is a really cleansing way of sending this project off. This is definitely a further step creatively than the likes of Eternal Blue, and shows them spreading their wings using the resources that they have of like being the biggest band the scene has ever seen. And like, I hope y'all come around to it. It's great. It's great. They did a great job here. I love this shit. This is, I don't know if this is my album of the year so far, because like what has been good so far has been great, like Whitechapel and West Side Gun. There you go. Apples and oranges right there. They really, really went for it here. Even on a song that didn't work, like I can still kind of recognize it as like a swing and a miss, instead of just like a completely bad idea that should have never even been touched or something lazy. Like, there's nothing on this record that sounds lazy to me. And given the position that they're in, you know, if anything, they had more reason to phone it in than any of these other bands have, and they sound just as hungry as anybody else in the scene. I am really stoked to see where Spiritbox go from here. And I'd probably hit this with like a 4 out of 5. Not quite a 4.5. Not quite. Ride the Wave kind of... Without Ride the Wave, probably a 4.5. Good stuff, Spiritbox. Looking forward to the next one.